My husband was the life of the party. He was brilliant, hardworking, and lived by intention. He was a good person, but under the influence of alcohol, somebody that I feared. When we were dating, my husband always had a drink or two, but I never knew that this would eventually take over our lives. We had some happy years, but with the passage of time, work intensified, and so did the drinking. I had 3 young children, and life was getting difficult. His drinking had increased, and he started losing his temper at night. Affairs began, not only with other women, but with alcohol. Yet I didn't know how deep this was or how it would destroy our friends, our family, and ultimately alcohol would take his life. It did not happen overnight. It happened over years. And it slowly affected all of us, him, my children, and myself. One affair died and others started, yet his love for whiskey was stronger than all of them. Fear became my companion. Life was calm until the first drink of the day. Sometimes it was noon, sometimes 3 or 4 in the evening, and fear would set in. Afraid to disturb him, afraid of his reactions, afraid of what he would do to me and the kids. You never knew what was going to happen once the drink was in his hands. We laughed during the day, we trembled at night. We learned to live with disappointments. We learned to hide in closets and under beds, and we prayed. The rosary was our companion. We drove around at night until he would fall asleep. We learned to sleep in hotels, paying cash under anonymous names. We learned that at times when we came home, we would be locked out. I feared him at night, and so did my children. Our children were in Catholic schools, and yet religion and God could not be mentioned in our house, for rage would take over him. I hid every Bible in the house for fear of upsetting him. I was exhausted all day, for nights were living nightmares. My heart raced with tachycardia, and I prayed to die every night. I prayed that God would allow me to live until my youngest daughter graduated from high school. We became isolated from family and from friends. He believed everyone was out to get him, and we believed him. It was a disease that had poisoned the entire family. There was pain, hurt, anger, and isolation. And as he would wake up in the mornings, there was no recollection, or only a vague recollection of the evening. When the nights were really bad, he would buy jewelry or send us flowers asking for forgiveness. I kept asking a friend if this was normal behavior or if it was abnormal, for I didn't know anymore. I prayed for guidance, and yet I felt that I was walking in darkness. I prayed for miracles, and my life was crumbling around me. I was so afraid of life, I had stopped living and had started dying inside. I couldn't understand the passage, "Fear not, for I am with you." For I lived in fear and I was exhausted. My physical health deteriorated and my kids were sad and angry, and I made a choice to leave. In November of 2004, I asked for a divorce. In February of 2005, I packed my kids' clothes in black garbage bags and moved out of my house. I was dying, and my children were dying with me. I felt that I had nothing except my children and my mother's support. No child ever wants to be separated from their parents, and yet I told my kids, "Papi, it's getting worse, and if we don't leave, we will die." Some moments in life just have to be lived. Life was difficult, exhaustion was our companion, but at night we had peace. Several months later, I got a job working in a refugee clinic, and by helping others, I started healing. There was little contact except for threats. He was hurting, and the drinking intensified. There was pain, and I was angry at him. I prayed silently, but I would not go into a church for Mass. The children visited, but rarely spent the night, and if they did, they always slept together with the door locked. I rented a small apartment that became home, and the children and I began to laugh again. In July of 2007, my oldest daughter was in a school trip and called me crying from the Sacred Heart Church in Paris. She told me, "Mommy, I had an epiphany and I'm so scared." I asked her, "What on earth is an epiphany?" And after she explained, I told her, "We have each other, and with love we can get through anything." Little did I know the meaning these words would have in my life. A month later, in August of 2007, my son went to visit his father on his birthday, and he called me up upset and told me, "Mommy, Papi is not waking up." "What do you mean?" I said. "He's not waking up." At that moment, I knew I had to leave my work and go to see what was happening. I took him to the emergency room in Sugar Land, and from there he was transferred to Methodist Hospital and was in the ICU for 10 days with acute pancreatitis. His organs were shutting down. They told me to stay the night, for he would not make it alive to the morning. When the doctors asked me how much he drank, I cried, begging them not to tell him I had discussed his drinking. I was still afraid of him, but in my heart, I knew that I would stay and help care for him. I knew the children loved their father, and I knew we were all hurting. The children came to visit the next day and cried. There were tears of sadness and tears of anger. Angry at what he had done to himself. From a powerful man, he was powerless. The alcohol and a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis would be his companions until his death. For the next year and a half, we cared for him. I told the kids, "Papi needs us to love him, and I need you to help me care for him." From August of 2007 to December of 2007, he stopped drinking, and then it began again. The children cried and wrote him letters. Girlfriends came when his health was good and disappeared when he was sick. In August of 2007, I told the children that we needed to find a parish, for if Papi died, he needed a church. We had always been strong in our faith, but as we were hurting, we had probably moved away. We came back to weekly Mass, and every Sunday, I lined up the kids to greet the priest, and Father Phil came into our life. We needed God's presence in our life. I knew in my heart that God had carried us in the last years. Now I needed to walk by him. I wanted the children to know that they were not alone in this struggle, and that God would never abandon their father as he had never abandoned us. Why do you care for him? People would ask me. Why now? Why not let him die alone? My answer was always the same, because he's the father of my children, because I believe there is goodness in him, because I love him differently, and I believe there is goodness. We learn to love him as he was with his struggles. I prayed to accept him and love him unconditionally. I stopped praying for God to change him. It was a difficult year and a half, for we had lived life without the constant surge of emotions of fear, anger, and disappointments. And going back brought up a reminder of all of these emotions. In December of 2008, we went on vacation as a family. At night, he slept in one room, and I slept in another room with the children. We knew he was drinking, but it didn't matter anymore. We had few moments in life to build beautiful memories. In January of 2009, he was back in the hospital and never walked again. His physical pain intensified. He drank his Ensure bottles, and then he filled his bottles with whiskey. It still hurt to see him do this, but perhaps we were kinder and more compassionate. Some days he was coherent, some days he was hallucinating, and we went along with his stories. It was difficult and scary for my youngest daughter to understand that Papi sometimes acted a little crazy. We pretended it was a game. We loved him as a person. We hated his behaviors. There was great goodness in him that had been masked by the addictions he developed. Yet deep inside, he was still a child of God. The year and a half were a gift from God to heal, but we had to make the choice to go back into his life. The children and I chose to live the present and put the past behind. I haven't forgotten the past, and at times it still haunts me, but taking care of him enabled me to forgive him and to ask for forgiveness. I always encouraged the children to talk to him. There were moments of tears when they told him their pain, and when he asked them for forgiveness for the pain that he had caused them. The last week of his life, I told the kids that Papi was dying and that we needed to be with him. Natalia was on her school trip, and she was able to get back the day before he died. He died on my oldest daughter's birthday, and yet we celebrated with him. On April 30th, 2009, at 12, he opened his eyes and looked around. I called the children, my mother, and his caretakers. He looked around at each one of us. and he slowly started the death process. We were telling him that we loved him, and we were praying the rosary. In the background, Gregorian chants were playing. He died surrounded by his family, surrounded by love. He had come back to his faith, and I believe God received him in his arms. After his death, we cleaned him and dressed him in his favorite clothes. It was my daughter's 18th birthday, and I felt we needed to celebrate with Papi. We sang happy birthday and ate cake around him, sitting in his bed. This was important to be done before his body would be taken away. Father Phil came at this time. When choosing scripture for his funeral, my youngest daughter, Natalia, told Father, I want the passage of love from Corinthians. There are a lot of people my father hurt that don't love him, but I love him, and I want to read that passage. I will finish the words I wrote for my children at their father's funeral, because it shows the strength that the children had at this time, and it was because of them that we were able to do this journey together. Fernando, I thank you for life beside you. We did a full circle, and I thank you for this. Love never dies. It just continues. Christina, Nicholas, and Natalia, it is never easy to lose a parent, and it is more difficult when you are young. Papi always loved you. Sometimes he just didn't know how. He accomplished great things, but he was also human and had great struggles. Life with Papi was a roller coaster. He made us laugh and he made us cry. He was unpredictable. Yet his love for you all was unconditional. As parents, we make many mistakes, sometimes hurting those that we love the most. You have faced many challenges in the last years, and I'm proud of how you have handled them. When Papi got sick a year and a half ago, each of you started helping out, and the past was left behind. The present was his situation. Christy, I remember how excited you were about being a senior and wanting to spend time with friends and have fun. Yet as his health deteriorated, you started spending less time with friends and more with him. From a few hours a week, it became days. It was a sacrifice of love. I know how much you wanted him to see you and Natalia graduate, and yet you told him it was okay if he had to let go, because you did not want him to continue to hurt. He read your letter and cried, because you gave him permission. Thank you for giving him peace. Nicholas, you started spending weekend nights with your father to help him ambulate. You carried him to his bed and to his sofa. Since you are you're stronger than your sisters, you did a lot of the carrying. You planned your weekend schedule around his needs. He couldn't move until we came, and he couldn't eat until we brought food. Thank you for loving him. Thank you for the dignity with which you treated him. Natalia, you loved him and cared for him. You told him a year and a half ago you wanted memories with him, and you cared for him with great gentleness. You would sit down and tell him about school, your friends, and your teachers. When he was in the hospital, you never wanted to leave his side. You know how difficult it was for him to go to your father-daughter mass, and yet you made him feel special. He knew how much you wanted your 8th grade trip, and he kept his last promise to you. He waited for you to come back from Washington. Thank you for your kindness and your gentleness with him. I love you all. Thank you for loving him, for making him laugh, for holding his hand, and for standing up for your beliefs. for carrying him when he couldn't walk, for silence when he was hurting, and for your presence when he was dying. You treated him with dignity. And you taught him that the greatest lesson in life, you taught him that what was really important in life was not greatness, but forgiveness and love. When Father Phil asked me a couple of months ago to speak a little bit about my life, I had to really think about it, because it was something that was difficult. But I feel that perhaps if I share my story, it can encourage other people. Nowadays, probably what keeps me going, it is my faith, and it is going to adoration. It has become a big part of my life. And I feel that whatever struggles we have, God will always be with us. There are times that we're carried, and there are times that we can walk with Him. Thank you.